Welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament podcast is meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This episode of Poetry of Predicament is Olivier of Death Hangout. This is a great conversation.
Don't you, if you mind having only me as an interviewer, as someone to discuss with, just let me know. My level of English is so and so, so if you don't understand me, please let me know and I'll repeat the question. I'll try to make myself as intelligible as I can be.
Good, and I also invite you to, if anything I'm saying is not clear, or if you'd like me to say it in a different way, I actually appreciate slowing down. I think this particular conversation that we're about to have is best slowed down to what people I admire quite a bit call slowing it down to the speed of trust. But we'll get to there and just define that later.
No worries, we'll do that. I'll just make a note for myself.
Yeah.
Cool. I won't introduce you, by the way. You'll be introduced with a voiceover. So we'll go straight into it. I will just ask the first question or whatever. I didn't prepare anything, so what comes, and we'll get from there. It's an open, free conversation.
Great.
It's more exchange. It's not like a formal interview. So if you feel like asking me something or question, feel free to do it as well. I know that you're a coach. I'm a coach as well. So I will respond to a question with a question, and this way we'll have an endless loop of questions, and that would be great.
That sounds good.
In August in France, there was this heat waves, massive heat waves. And we are kind of used of, to have like good or great summers. But on the news, they were all talking about climate change and sees like this kind of temperatures, and the period of the heat was very, very, very too long. There's something not ordinary here with these heat waves. And then there were articles that were released in August as well, about one article about saying that we will reach a tip point at some stage and the Earth might become a hothouse, basically not livable. Maybe you have seen this article as well. So the dialogue of the subject of a topic of climate change, but also the faith, our fate, what will happen in our future, suddenly became mainstream, in a sense. There were people talking about that more and more. Very recently in France, the minister who is in charge of the environment resigned. He resigned. He was there in this government for a year. And he was very well known and very well appreciated as a person in France. Maybe you know him. His name is Nicolas Hulot. He stayed 1 year. And he resigned. He decided to say, I'm quitting this government because what we do is not enough. The situation is catastrophic. It's really, really catastrophic. He was in tears, basically. And to see somebody like that in France, where you have to be strong and always keep cool and you calm, there was something which really shifted in people. Something said, okay, there's something not ordinary here. The situation is dire, is this environment, the climate, what we can see, reports, studies, analysis says that if we continue like this, something awful will happen to us. And the awful, nobody dare to say what it means, this awful, what it will really happen to us.
Mm-hmm.
But we all can feel it. And so that happened. And then it's still back to business as usual. So I don't know where I'm going with these kind of things, but I feel myself kind of preoccupied with that. I feel preoccupied with what we do, with what's happening. And it feels like talking about these things is just like us talking about death, you know, but this is what this podcast is all about, is how can we face and how can we discuss and how can we exchange on something which we don't want to see or we don't want to accept, like death, for instance. So that's a big intro and a long intro, and I'm sorry, Dean, about that. And I don't know what else to say, but what emerged inside you when I've just said that? You know, what is it for you?
Yeah. So I'm moved by what you just shared, and not so much the content, although it was a blessing to the world and especially a blessing to France to have a leader tell the truth and to actually share authentic emotion that comes anywhere near the scale of what's happening. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, thank you, Olivier, for having me here talking with you, because I respect what y'all are doing in Death Hangout. You are taking on one of the most difficult conversations in human history, and that is just to grapple with death and loss and grief. These are things that most developed countries, especially the USA, are terrible at. We have almost no language for, and certainly no ability for, really experiencing the extraordinarily normal and healthy relationship with death, loss, grief. So I absolutely appreciate what you are up to in Death Hangout, and for you then to press right up against which I consider to be an even larger scale conversation, and that is what's actually occurring at the scale of global conversation of death and loss and grief. And you know, that's where I get going. That's where my calling is, and it has been that way for you know, roughly 5 years now. You know, my whole life I knew that we were destroying the planet. There's a Frenchman that deeply inspired me, and I dedicated my book to him, Jacques Cousteau. Just deeply inspired me as a child. There was no one else who went right into my heart and showed me the miracle of this world, the beauty and the grief of what we were doing back in the 70s. And of course we know that it's just gotten worse. And so in the past 5 years, I started to really dive in and be exposed to what could be called anthropogenic climate disruption or abrupt climate change, which is an order of magnitude more significant than the climate change that we hear about from regular sources. And so you know, once I vetted that material, because literally when I heard that material of abrupt climate change, that it was not something in 2100, and it was not something just about levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. Yes, those are significant, and some people like to talk about 2100. I think you and I both know, and perhaps many of your viewers know, that's ridiculous. That timeline is absurd now. And I've seen that just in the past 5 years of writing my first book, which I put out last year. It's called The Impossible Conversation, because that's what I was left with when I did the research to vet the abrupt climate change information. I realized I've been in the training business, corporate training or personal development training, for close to 30 years. And I knew that this conversation of what it would take to actually address what's going on is something that is literally the impossible conversation for us.
Yeah.
So let me just stop there and see if any of that sparks you back, and if that addresses what you were headed toward when you first started talking.
Well, you know, I relate to that, you know, when you say this impossible conversation. That's what I feel like, you know, doing with people. I've heard about the terms collapse, you know, back in 2010, you know, Michael Rupert and all this, you know, and and at the time, you know, I was kind of ashamed, you know, just like, oh, I shouldn't watch that, you know. This is like these are just like conspiracy theories, or this is like something which will never happen. But there's something part of me which was, okay, there's maybe there's 2% truth in there, maybe. So I was kind of drawn to these subjects, to these topics. And then I've left them a little bit until, you know, when you put like something out of like a burning things, it came back to me. And now I agree with you, this timeline of it will happen in 100 years or whatever it will be, you know. It's I feel helpless most of the time, you know, because when I try to talk about these urgencies, about what can happen and what now science says will happen, and behind the nice terms, the nice words, which are very, well, nice, basically. What does it mean catastrophic, basically, for us, or difficult or challenging, or what does it mean really? It means for us that we can expect lots of people dying. This is what it means. And it feels like we don't want to see that. And somehow, you know, when you contacted me and you said, well, this is what I do, I said, well, you know what, I was thinking about that recently, because what we try to do with this death Hangout is, when you look at death, it's basically, or discuss about death, it's discussing about a certainty. That will happen. We will all die. And what we believe is in order to have a good life, you need to look at that. You need to have the end in mind. Otherwise, what do you do?
Yeah.
How can you be a good man? How can you be of service? How do you do the things that matters to you? How can you find your values inside you? So I'm sorry again, I'm taking a long time, and it's the first time that I'm having this space, but I like that. I think we need to have time, a little bit of time here, or slowing the pace, to say, how can we have this difficult conversation or impossible conversation with people which are so needed at the moment? Because I believe now more and more people feel it and see it, and it's backed up by science as well. And I don't know what else to say. Yeah.
Yeah. If I may, I'd like to do a little bit of a mapping out of how I've answered some of these questions for myself, and included a small fragment of this work that I'm now developing in The Impossible Conversation last year in that book. But this one is a book, this one that I'm writing right now is a book, and then a workbook to go with it, to be able to really start to embody this impossible conversation, because it's hard enough to just talk about it. We must have some kind of mapping for this completely unknown territory, and then ideally have some way to integrate it into our experience. Basically, since we can talk the language of coaching together, I believe that this is nothing short of the complete reinvention of coaching. You know, it's not that coaching as it's been known so far is no longer useful, or for some people in some circumstances. But from my point of view, the only relevant conversation to have is the one that you were just describing. How do we find meaning? How do I create my life as a way of serving the people I love, reaching for the things that matter most to me? And how do I do that when literally the fabric of reality is being shredded underneath us?
Right.
So this is the largest scale conversation that has ever happened on the planet. And I don't mean to sound overhyped, but I literally cannot find hyperbole here. There is no top end. This is literally the largest, and I would add the most violent conversation and event that humanity has ever faced. So if I could the thing I'd like to just speak a little bit about is, I kept asking myself the question, what got us here to this? And the here that I'm talking about is, I'm asserting that these are not problems that we're talking about, you and I, right now. We're talking about, yes, a raft of problems, thousands of problems that need solutions. But the things that I believe you and I are talking about right now are actually predicaments. Yeah. These are a scale of conundrum that we have no answers for. And we have, through willful ignorance, we have gotten ourselves past a point of being able to solve anything at that scale, says me. So I would ask myself, what got us here? And during writing the book, and the answer kept coming back, some version or another, we've disconnected. We've disconnected from the core, the primary sources of meaning in human life. And as I'll be describing in this next book, we did that as a part of an agreement, usually a silent or an unspoken agreement, in order to participate in this business as usual culture, this incredible thing we call normal reality. Let's fly on an airplane. Let's have this corporate job. Let's take the kids to soccer practice, and on. Everything is fossil fuel driven business as usual. And what I'm asserting is that in order to play that game, from when we first start touching it, we have to forfeit, we have to disconnect our connection with deeper self, with each other, and with the earth. And to give you a very quick example of that, look at any corporate executive. And if that corporate executive starts to have an upwelling of any of that core connection, that innate connection within themselves or about their right relationship with other people or with the earth, I say that as soon as they start to vocalize that, it's like the fuse is lit for them to be fired. The chance that they will go on to become the CEO or they will not. On average, that's just not going to work for them to have a sensitivity about, well, but we're paying people slave wages in Thailand to do that, to do this service. How can we continue to do that? Or we're destroying Indonesian rainforest and orangutan habitat. We've got to stop doing that. And I think you and I both know that that person will not be in that job very long. So that's a bit of a rough or a crude example, but I think you get the point. And so what we're looking at is a culture, an entire culture that is disconnected from the primary sources of meaning in human life. And from there, we walk forward in doing our daily routine within this. And we consider ourselves to be present in our lives. And what I'd like to assert is that everywhere we've disconnected with those primary sources of meaning, we have a huge blind spot, a huge hole. And we call that normal realities. And Olivier, when you were describing, in one of the times when you were speaking, you were describing that feeling in yourself. And I just got to express some compassion. That's as good as it gets in our world, is a sense of disorientation, knowing that something's wrong, but really not knowing a language to speak about it, and looking around us and seeing who can I talk with about this, because it looks like we're gonna die. Literally within our, my old guy lifetime, we are gonna see billions of people dying. And truthfully, I'll just show my hand a little bit here. I can be a little rough in this conversation this way. I don't care about people dying. I don't mean to be heartless, but the human supremacy and the willful ignorance that has gotten us here, we're all complicit now. There's no way around it. We all know somewhere, even the deniers know, we're making this happen. And what I'm concerned about is that we literally have these global scale indicators of that things are wrong. Things are not right in our world. And we ignore them. The word I like to use as this extraordinary skill we've all mastered called overriding. We're overriding those inner signals to the point where we've lost 2/3 of the wild animals on this planet within my old guy lifetime. 2/3 of the wild animals that walk this planet are no longer here. That's not a big enough indicator. We've got projections now that the coral reefs and the world's fisheries will all be either dead or collapsed before 2050. That's not a big enough indicator. We've got winged insects on this planet that various studies are showing that up to 80% of them are gone. That's not a big enough indicator that things are not right. One of the most disturbing of these is our tropical rainforests have become carbon producers rather than what we've all grown up with, is that for perhaps millions of years, they've been carbon sinks. That's not a big enough signal. And notice I haven't even talked about climate change yet, because I think climate change has been so twisted into this tiny little distorted issue that really, if all we're doing is counting CO2 in the atmosphere, we're done for. So thank you for listening to that. I'm sorry, now it was my turn to go too long, but I wanted to just particularly lay out how I look at these issues, that it's our disconnection from our primary sources of meaning that has caused it all. And that to kind of prove the point, look at these indicators and look at our ability to override those things. And to me, it's just extraordinary. It takes my breath away. So thank you for listening to that.
You know, what you just described, you know, these are data. And these are facts, hard facts. You cannot deny that. Or people who can deny that, I don't know, you know, what they are thinking or how they are wired, but anyway, leave the denial out of this. Let's take the people who can read that and accept that because they trust science. And still, I remember during my corporate years, I worked for a big company. And in my companies, they did a climate change study themselves internally. We had the scientists behind. So they did internally, okay, is it true? Is it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And the report was, yeah, they issued the report and they distributed the entire report to the entire company for everyone to read. So I read it. It was about 50 pages, 55 pages, well done, well documented with pictures and everything. And there was no doubt about the story. I'm not talking about animals. I'm just like focusing only on climate change, but it's the same. There was no doubt that climate change was happening and it was man self-made. And if we continue, it will be catastrophic, same things. It was internal. And I remember having this meeting with my teams and management, and you know, it was just before I quit, basically. I said, well, look, have you read the report? No. What does it say? Well, it says that it's catastrophic, again, but we need to change something. Silence. Silence on the line. Until one of my colleagues said, well, so what about this training that we want to do next year or whatever in whatever? Change the subject. And it went away. So what I'm saying is, this is where my kind of anger or disappointment or sadness or whatever I have inside me is, every time that I come with exactly the same facts that you just described, which are facts, hard facts, solids. Just like when I try to talk about death or, you know, what is needed to have this conversation, people will be silent and talk about something else.
Yeah.
And so that's the majority of people, well, that I've heard. And there's a small fraction who gets that. And they are just as hurt as us, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So you said something which I think is important. You said primary source of meaning, which I think resonates in me. And I would like to know more. So what do you define as primary source of meaning for us?
So Olivier, just because we're both podcast producers, and I know that you want to keep your podcast to half an hour, and I'm specifically making this very editable out so you can take out my words here, but I'm wondering, are you interested in going to 2 parts? Because even to start this answer, I take you past half hour.
Don't worry about that. I will take care with the editing, and I will do whatever can happen. Don't worry, it's fine.
Okay, great. You're asking what I mean by the primary sources of meaning in the human life.
Yeah.
So I try to keep my inspiring questions, the questions that I motivate myself with, as simple as I can. And so another simple question I carry is, how can we, and I'm usually asking from an American point of view because that's where I am. And because we're so fucked up. We are just truly fucked up. And so I'm asking, how did we get this effed up? How did it happen? And I, again, kept coming back to, we've disconnected from anything that has the possibility of bringing us back to a connection with the web of life. I've been blessed in my years of being in the training business because I come from a lineage where we had to walk the talk. We always had to fully as we could embody that which we were teaching, which takes practice. So if we're talking about mindfulness, that means, or meditation at all, what we would do is take on months and years of different kinds of meditation practice to be able to speak from experience. When we disconnect from the primary sources of meaning in our lives, we disconnect our ability to touch the depth of beauty that it is to be alive. We hollow it out. It's like taking all the center out of a bucket. We take all the good things out of whatever's in our bucket. And then we wonder why we have a society that is constantly craving, I want to be happy, happy. How do I be happy? The 10 steps to be happy. Of course, there's no happiness because there's no center. Our central connection to the web of life itself is hollowed out. And that's the only thing I can see that would make it possible for you and me to be having this conversation right now in the 21st century with human beings. And we're actually talking about the imminent extinction of not only the human race, but thousands, if not millions of other species within possibly my old guy lifetime, probably your lifetime, for sure your children's lifetime. That's insane. And to me, that's one part of the impossible conversation is we are literally a psychotic global culture. And at the center of it, the kind of the brain center of that twisted way of living is the USA. So I don't think I answered your question, but I wanted to just kind of point at some of the costs of that disconnection from the primary sources of meaning. Is that useful at all?
It is. It is useful. I would like to go back to what you said, about in corporate organization, like if you had a CEO who was thinking about these ideas, try to connect back to what it means to be, kind, and he won't be CEO for too long. There's this game about short-term and long-term, basically. About, is an organization or company about short-term profit, Or is it about meaning? Meaning, I bring something which is useful to the world. I try to do my work with this in mind, meaning that try to find people who wants to bring meaning in their life and in the life of others. And I truly believe that people around, even in this big corporation, they want that because they feel it. There's something empty, or they're trying to fill this gap with something else, which is more entertainment, more traveling, more extravagant parties, more stuff that you get.
Yeah.
And despite that, we forget how nature. It's incredible sometimes to see that reactions of people, very cynical, who would say, well, another species dead, or insects are dead. Well, less insect then. It's okay. You know, I don't have to clean the shield of my car because there's no insects as well. And by the way, there's no insects, you know, when I travel. That's true. I remember the time I was traveling, the shield of my father's car was full. Now, almost nothing. Right.
Yeah.
That's the sign. So there's this kind of, you know, the what we call the Anthropocene, us human, better than anybody else, disconnect from nature, and doesn't matter what happens here, we will find a way, we will find a solution.
Right.
Like always. And this arrogance,
Mm-hmm.
that really makes me angry.
Yeah.
Because to believe that we can just disconnect ourselves from who we truly are, from the nature, is just so silly. So is it fear? Is it like, and surely it's fear, because we don't want to see and recognize who we are. And that's why for me, mortality is so important. Because to get back to be humble again, meaning what is a life? What is a true life? What is living well? And you cannot understand or answer this question until you don't look at it, basically. But to me, is how we can, this arrogance that we have to believe that we can survive something, how we can be out of nature, how can be disconnected. And that makes me very angry. This is what I was saying. And to me, you cannot answer the question of how to live a good life, or how can I save others without looking at your mortality, basically. Mm-hmm. Without saying that you're human, and because you're human and mortal, you're part of nature, and you contribute to this cycle.
Yep.
And to me, the mortality aspect of this is the tools to get back to people out of this arrogance to, okay, you're just a human being here.
Yeah.
That was where I basically cut out. And I just said, okay, what do you think about that?
Yeah.
And that I asked you the question. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate and am very aligned with what you are saying. This is very similar to the work, the body of work I'm creating within this realm. And, you know, again, as simply as I can put it, it looks to me like what there is to do for a person like yourself, like me, like probably many of the people we know or the people you're speaking to in your audience. We all want to live a good life. We want to do right in life. We want to, some of us know the words, like you were saying, of being of service in some way. And I think these are really good things to have in our heart as we step forward into these awful questions of how do we do that in these times. And the only thing I know to do is to reconnect. There's one of my heroes is a woman named Joanna Macy, and her work is the work that reconnects. And she and Molly Young Brown have created this wonderful, teachable, shareable technology, if you will, methodology of training with people that gives them an opportunity to reconnect in that particular way. The work that I'm creating is really at the next level. It uses their incredible and beautiful and heartful foundation and just goes to the next level, which you and I are talking about now, which is, you know, things are happening so fast. There's really not time for a kind of a soft, easygoing, you know, if I do this, maybe in the next 10 years, I'll have a little bit more connection with people. We just don't have time, says me. And so when I use the word predicament and how we've passed the opportunities to change things in a significant way in so many different of these predicaments that are going on, I'm not at all saying, oh, just give up because we're so fucked. You know, that's just not the message that I want to land on and finish with. It may well be true. I don't know, but it sure looks that way to me. But within that, what I know from my life of my own practices, ironically, for entirely different reasons, I pursued practices that have kept me closer and have kept some of those sources of meaning connected in me all along. And I am so grateful for those. And it's that I am offering in the work that I'm creating, not because I'm now a new guru and I've got the 5 life hacks to save us through collapse, but because really what I have come to is what my calling is to bring as much beauty and love and grace as I can to life before I die. And that's it. It's not to save everything and do, recycle enough and on and, buy a electric car. And no, that's not my calling. I am so pleased that there are some people that when they reconnect, they discover, I want to go into politics and I really want to make a difference there. And I say, yeah, man, we need you. Go for it. That's not me. I'm not sure I wouldn't kill people in politics right now. It's just so disgusting. It's so vile and cynical. I couldn't do it. So I'm so glad that some people, when they touch their calling and they reconnect enough to know that they have agency, they have some amount of agency no matter what the world is presenting. They choose to engage with that calling, and we every one of us is needed. That's where I was talking about the reinvention of coaching. Because while many of the elements might look the same when people get reconnected, to get from here to some amount of reconnection is an extraordinary amount of inner work that most people don't have the backbone for, just to be really straight about it. So what I'm trying my best to create is kind of a stepped level of coaching engagement with people and offering them tools and practices at whatever level they're engaging on. The first one that I talk about is to have a foot in 2 worlds, which I think most of our conversation today is about. We have no choice but to be in the first world. It's all we've ever known. we drive our cars and we go to our jobs and we have these problems and all that. And that is clearly a world that is collapsing. Then there's the other world, which not only hasn't been realized, it hasn't been articulated yet. You know, Charles Eisenstein likes to call it the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. And while that's a lovely atmospheric statement, what it takes to be able to pull some of our attention into a world that does not yet exist, it takes immense courage. And in my estimation, it means that we really need to do the inner work to discover what is the shadow that I am carrying that has me be complicit in this. Because if we're not looking at our own shadow, if we're not doing our own work, we're bringing along the same toxic, cynical elements from business as usual into this world that we are so hoping to create with one another. And I'm hoping that's communicating as in terms of the very, very different world of coaching, or even having aspirations in life, than the coaching that exists only in the business as usual world. So sorry, I went on a bit of a track.
No, you don't have to be sorry, because I feel like this inner work or looking at the shadows is so important, so important. And it's scary, and it's not evident, and it's not easy to do that, this kind of work, the inner work. That's why you have so few of us doing this work, because we know how difficult it is.
Mm-hmm.
And how easy it is to just switch on the TV or the mobile, not the TV. See, I'm the old generation, you know, take the mobile phone and watch the YouTube videos, or to read a book that says 10 steps to get more happier, or whatever tricks or tips or things. And the solution is in us, and what we project, what we fear, what we don't want to see, how we pretend. It's just, you know, and I know your political stance, so I know that you won't get offended about that. And we don't usually do politics on the show, that's why. But you know, I still don't. Well, I understand how Trump got to power, but if it's not like a representation of our shadows, our collective shadows, I don't know what it is. You know, what we see, express that we see, it's there, present. And isn't it this like death of the biodiversity, the animals, the climate? Isn't it our shadow as well, expressed in a way of us, exactly as you said, disconnected from nature, from who we really are and what we really try to get from there? What was this thing that made us so arrogant and try to get more and more and more and more, and it's not enough? So this inner work, I truly believe in that. I truly believe in that. I try to do it myself. I try to look at this, and it's so damn difficult. Man. So what I'm saying is, it's more easy for you to write a 10-step book about how to save yourself from collapse, which I think that will happen, I believe, you know, mm-hmm. And I'm sure it exists already, this kind of things, you know, collapse is happening, save yourself, or because we're still clinging to this kind of old ways that we get rich out of it. How do you encourage people to do that, this inner work? How do you do that? How do you do that?
Encourage people to
do the inner work, this looking at the shadow.
Yeah. It's one of the largest, hardest questions I'm grappling with now. Because I can see what I often call a membrane of resistance, not only around the average person, who rarely, if ever, talks about any of this, but also around people who are collapse aware. You know, this shadow is deep and it's extraordinarily powerful. It also can be called the predator, a predator inside of ourselves, a shadow element that we disown. We deny its existence completely. And as we deny it, it eats us. It consumes our life energy. And I think that can be said for the individual level, as well as obviously the global level. And that's what we're facing. So what I can say is I'm creating this body of work, even though I don't have a good answer for you for your last question. How do you get people to be introspective at all? And then after that, how do you get people to do the very, very hard, deep work of articulating and integrating shadow, of reconnecting with these long lost elements of ourselves? And, you know, for that matter, reclaiming our sense of agency in life and purpose and integrity. We may think we've done that work and we know what all those things are, but a sense of purpose that was created in a world in which I'm disconnected from every source of meaning, I'd say that work needs to be redone. A sense of purpose, a sense of agency, and sense of integrity will be entirely different for someone who has done some work to integrate those shadow elements and to reconnect themselves. So, you know, I'm doing things like live workshops. We've got a workshop coming up in Ashland, Oregon in the middle of October, you know, so this coming month. Mostly, I think it's going to be online content that I'm anticipating offering level by level by level material that invites people to the next level and offers them support, suggested practices, and especially if they can do it together with other people. That's all I know to do, is just keep making the offering. And as people, they'll find themselves a level that they have the capacity for. I think you, Olivier, would have a massive amount of capacity compared to the average person who's just starting to look at this stuff. So if I may I just talk about some of those offerings?
Please do.
So at the easiest level, we offer what we call safe circle calls. There's a free call on the Zoom platform, just like we're talking on right now. It's on the first, third, and fifth Tuesday evenings Pacific time, West Coast USA time, from 6 to 7 p.m. And they're just sweet and slowed down, and they're a soft, safe environment in which people can really share what's there for them. Because these are people who are collapse aware, and they realize there are so few safe spaces where we might share our grief. Or ironically, we might share some of the core joy that we have amidst all the rage, amidst all the chaos and craziness. There can be these moments of grace that are just absolutely exquisite. So it's not just a bunch of people whining with one another or crying or grieving. It's not just those things. In fact, the whining quotient is ridiculously low. It's a chance to have hearts beautifully broken open together and shared. So at the most basic level, there you go. And that, if somebody's interested, they can sign up for that on our website, which is livingresilience.net, and also for the newsletter about the other stuff that we're doing, including the workshop in Ashland. What I can see is needed in the next iteration is this kind of gradated level upon level for people who are more and more interested in doing this work that you and I have been talking about, so that they can do it at their own speed, they can do it on their own, and then if they want the coaching that goes along with that, that's available. And if you come up with better ideas, Olivier, we've kind of hinted at it in our emails back and forth, since we're both familiar with the coaching environment and we're both have very similar kind of foundational desires, like how to engage with this whole different calling in life. You know, maybe there's some collaboration that can happen. One thing I can say that is part of my calling, and I believe it's for most people, is this is a time to find your people. This is not a time to do what in America, between 2/3 and 3/4 of Americans never talk with anyone in their life about these large scale issues of consequence. Never. That to me is an epidemic that promises, if we continue with that, what it promises is we will have all the negative effects that you and I have been talking about, and they'll happen sooner than we can imagine, and we will go there in silence. That's horrifying to me. So if any of the things I'm saying resonate with you or with anyone else who's listening, this is the time to reach out. Please subscribe to my podcast, the Poetry of Predicament podcast, which is a YouTube channel, and sign up for the newsletters of Living Resilience, and let's keep reaching out to create networks that actually mean something. We're the most connected, supposedly, that humanity has ever been, and yet the disconnection is literally driving us to extinction. So thank you for letting me say all that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean, for saying all this, actually. Your work is very well needed. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah.
It has been great.
Really a pleasure to speak with you, and I really am sincere with that last invitation. If you guys want to do some just brainstorming and conjuring and collaboration and talking, I'm very serious. This is the time to find our people and to be able to move forward with the kind of dreaming and imagining that only comes from doing this kind of work.
I'm actually considering that very seriously as well, because from my end, my attempt with the Deaf Hangout is basically that: is how do we talk about the impossible? How do we have an impossible conversation? Sorry, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Because I believe that looking at our mortality is the same thing as looking at climate change. It's the same thing. Or extinctions, mass extinction, and all this kind of predicament that we have. So for me, it's the shortcut. It's kind of look at that and we'll talk about all the rest. And I'm really convinced that with what's happening, more and more people need a space in order to express themselves, to share.
Yeah.
I've never shared, as I said, maybe you've seen some of the interviews or podcasts, but I never shared as I did with you. Never. And I feel it helps me, and thank you for listening. And you know, I can see that you're a coach. So I really like what you do, and I really like this idea of offering a space or something. I really like that. And I would like to dream maybe with you about something. Yeah, that I would like to do.
Yeah. So please keep up the good work, and thank you for letting yourself come close as you did today to touching that inner experience. That made it truly worthwhile for me, and it invited me to touch that as well. In fact, right now. Sometimes I forget the scale of what we're actually talking about. And what I would want more than anything in any given day, in any conversation, is to be able to look over at the person I'm speaking with right now, and to be able to know that we both have beating hearts, and we both want more than anything to be connected with this absolute miracle that it is to be alive. And there is tragedy there, there's deep grief there, and there is deep beauty, and there's deep joy. And so I honor you for the work that you're doing, and I look forward to whatever we might pursue at whatever level some other time.
Thank you. Thank you for all this. Thank you, Dean.
All right. Really good to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean. Take care.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. You may want to check out our sister podcasts, the new Lifeboat Hour with Carolyn Baker on Podbean and at carolynbaker.net. Also, the Impossible Conversation podcast, another channel on YouTube. Thanks so much for joining us. Join us again later for another episode of the Poetry of Predicament.